recorded and are uploaded later on the YouTube channel. The purpose of this is to kind of give you the ability to share with your user audience. So some people who perhaps are not that familiar with Qlik Sense or Vizlib in that capacity in your organizations, to give them that YouTube channel so they can get themselves a little bit more familiar. Next to this, obviously, also very important is our regular blog posts. So we have a very, very talented copywriter who, together with us, is publishing weekly posts on various topics that you would find normally very, very useful. So, for example, ClickView versus Qlik Sense is one of our actually very successful blog posts measured on views and visits, which kind of explains, what the benefits are, how the mind should change it. So if you're, for example, in a position where you're currently losing a lot of ClickView, or you want to convince stakeholders or even your users to start using Qlik Sense more, this is actually a very, very useful blog post for you. Naturally, we also do our monthly release notes in our blog post, so you can see what has changed, plus a quick summary of highlights, ultimately, of every new extension. And naturally, announcements like being part of a TED program was also posted on blog post. So if you can, go to vizlib.com/blog, put it as your favorite, and once a week, typically, we release something new, which you hopefully will find very useful. So now continuing with very interesting things is the TED program. So the Trusted Extension Developer Program announced by Qlik 2 weeks ago. So this was an official press release. This is, a strategic project and direction from Qlik. And some of you might have heard about this since about a year. There have been talks about certifying, accrediting, or somehow reviewing extensions to make sure that they are obviously approved by the mothership for use in production, for example. And we're very, very glad to have been invited to pilot that program. It started back in March, and over a course of three months, we co-developed a little bit the program. We gave a lot of feedback, and together with a very talented Qlik branch team, we managed to launch this 2 weeks ago with 5 of our Vizlib extensions being already officially certified, accredited. Accredited is the right word. But more to come, obviously, in the next couple of weeks. So just to give you an idea as well, what does it mean, right? So obviously, there's a stamp of approval there, which is people understand, but what else? What else is behind that TED program? I think Qlik will do some webinars around this as well themselves in August, and will provide more information to not only customers, users, but also perhaps to aspiring developers themselves. But in essence, there are 4 key elements included in the TED program, which is obviously formally the extension accreditation. So Qlik is reviewing the code. It is looking for potential risks, vulnerabilities, to ultimately also make sure that we are not, or anybody else is not, using unsupported Qlik API functions. The goal is to make sure that as Qlik is releasing new releases, June, September, November, that our stuff will not break. So there is full transparency around the code that is being used, and ultimately also they check some stuff around responsiveness and mashup readiness. So they make sure that it ticks off all those boxes, or if it doesn't, at least it's announced to make sure people are aware of it. Obviously, they also check best practices and enablement. So, they review our code and say, look, guys, this is what you can improve. You shouldn't be using that. You should be using this, which obviously, improves the quality of extensions in general, and gives, customers and users confidence that, even a small developer, or Vizlib in this case, is providing high quality products. There's some testing around that. So we have formally created an automated test script using Afterworks. So every time we release a new version of our extensions, that's not formally tested, and with screenshots and comparisons. So that's a big requirement before you can embark on the TED program. And last but not least, The TED stamp means that we are committed to constantly improve, upgrade, and support our extensions. Now with Vizlib, obviously that was the case even before the program, but new TED members, as you will see them coming on the market, hopefully soon, we'll see, will be supported extensions. Questions, where do you find them? So they're all located on the Qlik market. So I think if I can open that quickly, just show you, you'll see here, when you go to Qlik Market, all the trusted extension developer offerings. In this case, they're mostly Vizlib because we were the first ones, but here is where you will see the remaining ones as well. And just for you to check, there's going to be a version here, which says which version is officially accredited, and you can cross-validate it if that's the one you have installed from Vizlib. So yeah, it's a very, very exciting step. I think it's very important as well for the Qlik ecosystem, and for us, Vizlib, naturally as well. For you as our customers and users, nothing really changes. We're working and committed to developing high quality code and supported extension as we did before. But it's nice to have Qlik now on board as well. If you're interested yourself to find out more about this, you can sign up on the TED program using the link below. But yeah, exciting stuff. So taking this further now to our latest updates. So naturally, our newest and coolest extension, personally, is we managed to actually release it in July. That was the Vizlib pivot table. It was a big, big undertaking. It took us about 3.5 months to get it right. Performance is key in the Vizlib pivot table, and getting that straight was what took a lot of time, engineering, and also testing. But eventually we got that right, and we managed to create a Vizlib pivot table, which is highly customizable, gives you full control over interactivity, formatting, but also some added functionalities like show and hides, exporting to Excel with a formatting option, and also the ability to create P&L reports using the Vizlib table or ad hoc. So the best way to showcase that is naturally to go directly into Qlik Sense, which I'm dragging onto now into the screen. I need to create some space here. Perfect. Right. So here's a pivot table. We recreated like a dummy P&L report, which shows you some various metrics. Doesn't really matter what they are, but they're highly representative. A mix between percentages as well as actual numbers, and then you can see those numbers pivoted by the regions and months. Now, this is obviously just an example, and just to showcase, you have, again, just if you've used the Vizlib table, you're familiar with the structure of our property panel, but you can see you can change the headers. If you don't like the background blue, you can choose it in red, and immediately updates, the way typically people are modifying and updating their reports in Excel. It's very, very structured similarly in there's the pivot table. And the beautiful thing here is, naturally, you also have these kind of dynamic components here, so you can rearrange them on the fly and the pivot gets redrawn. Also, one thing that was very important for us was sorting. So right now it's sorted from January, February, but you can reverse the sort order by clicking here and then, oh, sorry, I'm sorting the other way around here. Okay, that's not how I expected, but anyway, continuing with that, what I want to show you is this has been personally for me one big blocker, that those kind of interactive elements on the pivot table in native Qlik Sense are typically not always needed, and they take up a lot of real estate. So one thing that you can do here is naturally hide them. If you want to have a more fixed report, you can easily remove them so the user has a pre-canned way of viewing the pivot table. Naturally, you have many more settings around there, and I'll go through some of them in more detail. So the ability, for example, to have everything always expanded. If you don't want it, you can see it collapsed. Perhaps quickly remove the nulls here, make sure that we have a nice review, and which gives the ability to drill down to the user. So it's a little bit more interactive in that sense. What makes this table personally very, very, very cool is the ability to export what you see here on the view. So if I go back and I say, look, I'm going to expand back my table, show everything in a full formatted way. You can see here, scroll down, you have a lot of columns and it's still performing quite well. You can right click, you can export this, and you can download the data to Excel. If I open this, you will see that the formatting has been retained, so the user can actually export the table as they see them. You get what you see from the screen. So that's actually a very important feature that we worked on, cleverly implemented, and it will also make its way into the Vizlib table. So please be patient on that. It was a little bit easier on the pivot table, but just so you know, these things will also make their way in the rest of the library. One cool thing, and that's when you users who've been using Qlik a lot, I think this will increase your heart rate. If you go to the dimensions and you go to the region, you can see here there's a tiny button, which is a calculation condition. So the calculation condition basically shows and hides the dimension in the pivot table based on a certain Qlik expression or a number. So if I, for example, take region and I put in a 0 here, it will hide the region dimension. So you can quickly, I think, grasp what this means in terms of interactivity and flexibility, because you could potentially allow the user to, making specific selections, to add or remove dimensions from the pivot table, ultimately creating something like an ad hoc report or a custom report. So this is exactly what we've kind of built here. So this is an example ad hoc table, which uses on the left-hand side a certain number of predefined dimensions, predefined measures. And as a user goes in, and that could sit on any data model, you can select sales quantity, revenue, margin, and then you see a selections are being made here. And at the bottom for dimensions, you can start selecting segment desk, sales rep, region, product. And you see the pivot table is building up on the fly. And it's not only building up on the fly, people can then rearrange it. They can use right click, they can export to Excel if they want to, use this as an exporting tool. And what is actually much nicer around this is the ability to save that particular view using a bookmark. So if I come in here and I say Martin demo ad hoc view, right? This is now stored. If I clear my selections, I'm back to normal. Imagine I'm just, coming into the dashboard first thing in the morning, and I can then click my bookmark, and then boop, the table gets recreated again to what it was before. Very powerful. An example how to build this is available in the demo app that we ship together with a pivot table, so you can see exactly how that is structured and what the tricks are. Naturally, formatting was a key element here, so we created like an example table that is, extremely formatted. Not necessarily nice in terms of color, but just shows you that you can highlight the totals, you can have columns differently, almost every single thing here. And that could be conditionally, so based on an expression, or that could be something that gets applied to the whole row or to the whole column effectively. And this one is fully expanded. By the way, one thing that was always missing in native Qlik Sense was the ability, when you had it fully expanded here, the dimensions, the titles were not in order. You always had to use the dynamic titles here. So that's something we introduced. And not only that, you can also dynamically increase it, you can reduce it. You see, these are similar settings that we had in the Vizlib table that we inherited in the Vizlib pivot table. So we took over a lot of these settings. Which brings me to the point, if you look at these icons here, we also inherited the icon representation type. So if I go to accounts receivable overdue here, you can see here, at the moment we only have 2 Sparklines mini charts on their way, will come eventually, but for now we started with 2. But the indicators are structured exactly the same way. You can choose an icon when it's up, when it's down, or when it's equal, and ultimately you can put a threshold, so that can be a dynamic calculation as well. If you want to be a bit funky in terms of capabilities around this, we kind of explored various types of icons. So it can be fun, but it just shows you, you're in control of how it looks like. one feature that I want to highlight is, so coming back to that talk table, I appreciate you need to construct the table by loading dimensions and measures. So we're working on a way to make this a little bit more user-friendly, to pick your dimensions and measures on the fly for your pivot table, because I understand, that the dynamic flexibility is very, very powerful because it is in Excel, for example. So what we're doing now is, just to illustrate here, I've just created a table which has a lot of dimensions and a lot of measures, but not all of them are displayed. We're actually introducing something here at the top right, which is going to be a dimension and measure picker. So at the moment, you see I have 3 dimensions selected. You can then actually create them, select them on the fly, and the same also with the measures, and have it a little bit more user-friendly. And the idea is that this comes out of the box. So all you need to do is, if you go to create your pivot table, that you just define all your measures you want, all the dimensions you want, right? The full list. And then the user can start picking and matching and removing them as they want it on the fly. This is not released yet, in development, but we aim to get this out probably by next week. So we're just doing some testing around with this. And just to understand how our vision goes, the next step would be to create some sort of favorites, which are pre-stores the configuration combination of dimensions and measures. And these favorites could be, saved only for me personally, because they're only I want to be able to look at them, or you'll be able to share those favorites together with somebody else, or set like a global favorite so everybody can preset the dimensions. All very cool, very important. We've done the legwork, so all these kind of extra features that we're working on, also like expand the whole column on right click, and these are relatively easy and are on their way, and expect them in the next 2 weeks. So if you have not already played around with the pivot table and you're not already familiar with its capabilities, please explore it. I think especially finance, if you have a finance department using Qlik Sense, will be very happy with it, but also any sort of exploration. So coming back to the presentation. So that's the Vizlib pivot table. Going on with standard updates, we've also improved the Vizlib table a bit as well. To set your expectations, these are not as exciting new features as with the pivot table, but still for some of you who've been using this extensively, I'm pretty sure it'll be very, very useful. So I'll now go directly into the pivot table. The Vizlib table. So 3 features, and by the way, some of the people who have requested those features are on the call, so thank you very much for that feedback here. So one feature was the ability to control which dimensions on the left-hand side or in your table are actually selectable. Not always you want to give the user the ability to select everything on the screen. So what we've done here is we've added sales representative as 1 dimension and the email as a 2nd dimension. However, I want the user not to be able to select the email. Perhaps it doesn't make sense in your case, or it would, show wrong numbers afterwards. So what you can do here now is you have the ability here to explicitly enable it or explicitly disable it. So if you do that, you will then have the user will not be able to select anything on the email column dimension, but it'll continue to have interactivity on everything else. So that kind of prevents the case where you typically don't want the user to be able to select it, so you put it as a measure, but instead you can keep it as a dimension and you just prevent the user from selecting it, so nothing gets selected here. So that's one tiny feature requested by some of you. Another thing that was quite important was the ability to size the table depending on the available data that is there. So if I, for example, select Deborah Halman, Dennis Johnson, you see now, or perhaps let me deactivate the setting first so you see exactly what has changed. Perfect. Right, so this was the table until now. People were selecting stuff, and then perhaps no. Sorry, that's a setting. Apologies, this is a live demo, please bear with me. So you see here, there's a little bit of space at the bottom, right? And if you were selecting different values, that space would always retain. And that was unfortunately, until recently, kind of a fixed thing. However, what we've done now is if you go into the settings, you will have the ability to auto size the totals and the scroll bar to constantly fit the size of the data. So this is now dynamic and will always be positioned at the bottom, no matter how many selections you have. Cosmetic improvement, but I think very important. I remember in Qlik was using that a lot. And so yeah, we got around to that and we included it. The last important feature we added into the Vizlib table was the ability to specify the indicators on a conditional basis. So far, if you go, for example, to sales amount, remember we have, the progress bar. Let me select it quickly. The bullet chart, mini charts, but also the indicators. Now, the indicators so far were always fixed to one value. So you could put in, let's say, 48,000, right? And then you had one fixed value to this. Sometimes, however, you have a use case where you want to look at the year-to-date sales amount and compare it with last year on a dimension level. So every single sales rep had a different kind of dimension. So that wasn't possible until recently, but this is now an added feature. So if I go here in the indicator threshold expression and I select last year sales amount, I use sum and I add it here. This is now calculated on an actual row level. So this makes now much more sense because you can see all my sales rep have improved with the exception of Dennis Johnson, of Davis Leihag, I think, who ultimately fell down. So, helps you a little bit of analysis and hopefully has improved our indicators a little bit for your use cases. By the way, the same capability is also now available in the pivot table. So we improved it in both of them. So yeah, and obviously a lot of bug fixes and improvements with June and July. But if you want to see an exact list of what has changed, again, you can go into the July release and see here directly in the change log what has changed. Continuing now, showing you the Vizlib table, the Vizlib pivot table. So the next, oops. Sorry, just swap it. I moved too quickly. So after the Vizlib table we actually did some very, very interesting improvements on the Vizlib Line Chart. And obviously we improved the tooltip a little bit because it was a bit slow or flaky in that sense, but we made it make sure it's a little bit more consistent. But one new improvement that we added was the horizontal and vertical segmentation, which I will showcase to you shortly, and also the ability to stack the lines. The stacked lines is not yet available. We'll release it probably at the end of this week, but I will showcase it to you as well, because it's a very necessary feature of a typical line chart. So coming into, I'm opening now Qlik Sense again. Right. We're here. So I'm going to explain to you the segmentation feature that we have added to the line chart. So for this, I'm just going to create an example extension from scratch. So we have the line chart here. We just drag it, drop it. We choose month as the measure, and let's say average sales. Right. Go to appearance. I'll make sure all months are visible. Just make sure for completeness. And right. So now the segmentation allows you to color different segments of the line chart depending on certain conditions. So if I go now to the measures and I go to average sales, you see here naturally all the various rich settings that we have, including the line color. By default, you can obviously change it to something else, something static, but the idea is to color it by segment. So in this case, let me perhaps reverse it to Vizlib blue. Brilliant. So now when you select segment, you can first decide whether or not you want to segment the line chart by verticals. so by the x-axis, or horizontally on the y-axis. Let's start with verticals in this case. So you need to add a condition for a segment in this case. You can either add it as a percentage value or actually with fixed values. Fixed values would make more sense in this case. So let's say from January until April, this is one segment. And I can color this as, red in this case. Now I'm going to add another segment, which starts in April. Let me select value, starts in April, and it goes until December, right, which is my second period, and I'll put that in green. And you can see immediately that the line chart is changing colors depending on whether or not you are within that segment. And that could be either something fixed, as I just did now, or you can add a Qlik expression or, certain highlights. Where this would make sense is where you potentially also add the representation type as an area, right? So you can see it's a little bit more highlighted. But obviously, I would always recommend if there's a change in color that signals something to your users, perhaps also add a reference line to this. So something obviously happened in April. So you will add a line here. You can add, let's call this the product launch, for example, put it at the top, add a little bit of a solid border and make a little bit. So this way you can contextualize your line chart much more, giving more information to the user onto given segments on the x-axis. The same, let me quickly remove this, obviously also applies on the y-axis, so based on a measure. So if I quickly remove these now and I change the segment by horizontal and I say value from 0 until 800, that's my base case. So everything within here is, let's say, red. But everything that is above 800, so I add another condition here. So from 800 to, let's say, 1000 is green. So this way you can kind of indicate whether something sales or a metric has exceeded their average, and that is ultimately color highlighted. And for the people in the audience who are from healthcare, there's a fantastic use case for this feature, which is called the SPC chart, the statistical process control chart, where you can ultimately highlight outliers within a certain probability range. We're probably going to do a separate demo on this, more healthcare specific, but I think this should be now achievable. And from what I've heard from a lot of Qlik folks, especially Dalton Ruhr and Joe Worthington, this will be a very, very valuable thing for some of you. So very important. But now let me quickly remove it, the segments, go back to the standard area line chart and put this, static color, remove it as line chart. So now the beautiful thing is, right, we want to be able to add a second dimension, and naturally this splits my line chart into the 4 regions I just selected. So now, by the way, this is not yet live, but will be made available shortly. You will have a setting here, which is called stack data. So if you stack it, you will then ultimately get a stacked view of your table, of your line chart. Sorry it took so long, but ultimately better late than never. So this is now will be now made available to you to ultimately see the total nicely, plus also the splits with them. So yeah, so these settings will be made available to you shortly. Segmentation is already available in the latest version. Stack will be released at the end of this week. But yeah, these are the highlights on the line chart. Continuing, just really briefly, not very big releases, but still some features I want you to be made aware of on the Vizlib Pie Chart and on the Vizlib Sankey Chart. I think these were our friends from the NHS who built a really nice Sankey chart, but they wanted to see data values on the actual links. So this is what we've done. So now you have an option to actually put the data values on the underlying links here. And depending on the angle, obviously, of the link, the data points will be angled together with them. But naturally with Vizlib, if you go to the link styling, you will see that you have the ability to position the labels. You can either put in the middle or you can put them a little bit more to the left, and ultimately provide some little bit more information about the magnitude of the various links in the Sankey chart. Naturally, the same metric is also available in the tooltip, so you don't necessarily need to show it, but it would be good, especially if you're using the Sankey chart for printing purposes and printing and similar. And then you can obviously play around with font size, or no, you can't. They're auto-sized depending on the size of the link. But yeah, that's now available. By the way, if some of you are not aware of this, you can actually zoom into it. So if you don't recognize the numbers, you can actually look at them in more detail if you wanted to, and then click on the home button to zoom out. Cool feature. If you were not aware of it, now you are. And very quickly as well, the pie chart. So what we did here, and that's an exercise that we're doing with all our extensions, Vizlib heat map next is the support of alternative dimensions and measures. So here, this is a standard in the native one as well, but we've now incorporated it in Vizlib as well. You'll be able in your pie chart to define multiple alternative dimensions, so basket item, let's say, and then these can be selected on the fly. So you can give your users the ability to do a little bit more ad hoc analysis of your charts. So two tiny things, so I didn't want to spend too much time on this, but still make you aware of it. So these were the feature releases within the time span between June and July. So that was the last month. I'm pretty sure next month we'll release many more of them. But continuing now with our most exciting, newest extension that will be released in the coming weeks, which is the Vizlib KPI designer. So we had a lot of requests and a lot of questions from our existing customer base and user base and are on the roadmap, and people have asked for this KPI object. There are very good KPI objects available on Branch already. Climber KPI, the eCraft KPI, or even this I think the smart KPI object, and all of them do a fantastic job. But one feedback that we received from a lot of people was that they do something good, but they're fixed to it. They cannot change some of these things. And so for us, what do we do? Do we create another KPI object, which is kind of pre-structured? And we decided, what, we're going to do this differently. We're going to give you not a KPI object, but a designer. A designer where you can create a pixel perfect KPI object, how you like it, how you want it, by using a so-called layer principle. So I'm going to now jump into the demo. Let me open the app and just create a new sheet. Just put it here for, oops, here we are. Nope, I need a new sheet. Here we are. So, by the way, this is still in development. We're still going to refine the last pieces of the extension, especially the property panel. But I hope that will give you an idea how it will work in general. So the idea is that you will drag a KPI object on the screen, and instead of predefining measures and having a fixed number of metrics to put in or charts, you will have the ability to add a layer. A layer is added to the screen, and you can choose what that layer is. It can be a text, an icon, an image. It could be a chart or an indicator effectively, or even a bullet chart. So what you can do here is you can add a text as a starter, and you can say favorite KPI. Right? You can position a text wherever you want. You can actually even auto-size it. So depending on the size of the layer, it actually adjusts and it's responsive. So you can put this here on the side, let's say. You see, if a KPI object shrinks, the text shrinks as well. So it's all fully responsive in this case. So you can put it here. Now I'm going to add another layer, which I want it to be an icon. And I'll put it here next to it. So see, the positioning is actually very, very clever. You can actually also overlap it if you want to. I will come to that in a second. I'll give it another color. Let's put it in red. And actually, I want to choose a different icon by clicking on that thing here that we also use in other components. And I can give it, I don't know, a calendar here. Right. Now the interesting thing comes where, all right, we want to add a metric, and that could be in our text, right, in this case. So we can do, let's go into the expression. Let's find something that is quite useful. Let's say actual amounts, and let's sum it. Let's put it there and apply it. So you can see this is already taking over the metric in this case. Obviously, you can apply some formatting around it. But this is a feature that will be added ultimately as well. Okay, here I can take the format. Thank you, David. He's sitting next to me. Right, so you can put it here. Let's increase the size a little bit. And then, yep, put it there. So that's my favorite KPI. Perhaps let's play a little bit around with the colors, make this one here red as well. Cool. So now we want to supplement it with a chart. That's my next layer. So here I will now choose to add a line chart. As a line chart, I will choose a month as a dimension. You can see here, let's put it here at the bottom. And as the expression, I will use also actual amount over time. So that is now applied. And you can see the line chart being plotting here. Obviously, we have a lot of tiny settings here, like the axis settings. So in this case, just to keep it clean, I will remove all these things because I'm actually only interested in the movement. I'll remove the labels and even the axis title and have it here. So now I can use this and overflow it. And that's my trend. As a matter of fact, I can also choose this as a line chart. Let's choose something better than black. Let's make this blue, perhaps. And if I wanted to, I can leave it here at the bottom or actually put it here over the text. But since this is now working in layer mode, I need to put it at the very, very back end. So this is how you could, for example, create the line chart. Let's perhaps make the text white as well. And perhaps a little bit smaller. Oops. Right. Or perhaps the last step, just to show you the full scope of it, would be to add a bullet chart, which I can drag in here, and just to show the last aspect of it. And I can put it here, extend it, and I can actually put here some more metrics that I have. So for example, I go to my actual amount, and I copy the same thing. I can put it here, go into the bullet chart. This is my target value, and my target width is a little bit smaller. No, my actual value is a little bit smaller. So let's say 0.8. And we can supplement this, and let's make sure we use the same color as above. So, using these kind of functionality, you can create your KPI object as you want it, entirely custom to your view. And you see it's a little bit, sorry about that, to your view how you want it, and then this will be ultimately responsive. So it's a little bit ugly, but the idea is that with this capability, you'll be able to create any sort of KPI object you want. So you can either have multiple KPIs within one object, you can have a combination with different segments, or you can even have multiple icons and a bullet chart here. So one thing I wanted to show you here, however, on the KPI object, and that's, by the way, a much cleaner example than I tried to replicate. Apologies for that. But we have multiple layers here, and each individual layer can be controlled separately. So we have two control elements here. So for example, you have, as with any other Qlik Vizlib extension that we have, you have the ability to show and hide the layer. So with a Qlik expression. So at the moment I'm seeing the metric, but I put this as 0, I can hide this. So you can actually dynamically construct the layout of your KPI object depending on the selections that you're making or based on some conditions. So not only can you highlight a metric in red if it's of interest based on some certain selections or if the threshold is code, but you can also show different kind of KPIs depending on what somebody is selecting. Another very powerful feature that we have added for every single layer is the ability to add actions. So at the moment, and you can add actions on 2 levels. One, you can add it on the interactivity level here. So basically the whole object gets one action overlaid. So if I click on the KPI object, it'll make a selection on the field, or it'll apply a bookmark, it will clear selections, it'll move to the next sheet and similar. Or you can actually apply the same action on individual layers. So actually, if I click on sales July, then something is happening. We're selecting, I don't know, month July. And if I'm selecting the metric here, I'm actually performing a different action. So ultimately, that will give you full flexibility of how a KPI object works. Our motivation was to give you the ability to see anything you see on the internet, any KPI object you see on any other platform, technology, or tool, and to be able to replicate it like for like within Qlik Sense for yourself. So the layer concept is very, very powerful, but we also will introduce some presets, so some pre-configured KPI objects that you'll be able to use to ultimately get faster to where you want to. So that's so far on the KPI. I hope you like that concept of layering. By the way, the layering has a benefit that you can actually overlap objects, something that is quite unique in Qlik Sense. And we will make sure that we implement the same concept also in our Vizlib container, which we'll call the grid view fairly soon as well. So yeah, I'm leaving now from the KPI just to kind of conclude our session today about our roadmap. So as already highlighted, the KPI objects will be the next extension to be released in August. We have 15 extensions so far, so we've went quite a long way since the past year and a half since we started ultimately with our product launch. But we're still there, waterfall chart, combo chart on the go in the next 3 to 4 months, same with the slider and the sheet menu. And last but not least, we'll also do regular updates. And one thing that is very, very important to a lot of users in the audience, and especially also customers who are already onboarding with Vizlib and are using it extensively, we are working together with Qlik R&D to resolve some issues we have with printing to PDF or PowerPoint directly from story mode. I don't want to make any promises on dates just yet, but we have already resolved 2 extensions. And we think we kind of find a way to get that applied for the rest of the library. So this is being in the works. I can't yet give an ETA or an estimate because every extension is different in their own way. But hopefully in the next 2 or 3 months, the full library will be supported to be working with exporting from story mode to make sure that those objects are visible as well. So with that, sheet menu is on the road as well, but yeah, and obviously that's not where things end. Once we deliver those critical items like the combo chart, waterfall chart, we already have a list of new ideas, which however will only really reveal towards, I guess, November, December. We want to make sure that we work towards a roadmap that is customer driven. So, your feedback generally, but also your feedback, perhaps in this webinar is highly appreciated. And I've also introduced a couple of polls to get your opinion on some of the things that we should be working on. Yeah, so with this, I'm concluding the session today. By the way, before I start with the Q&A, we are going to be in New York. I'm going to be in New York next week. So if some of you are around there and you want to meet, already pinged some of our customers. So we should be meeting as well. But if anybody else is there and you want to give me a shout, I'm more than happy to meet. I have a quite wide schedule from Monday to Friday. So happy to meet and talk about Vizlib. So with this, I would like to open Q&A and invite you guys to ask any questions you might have. If you want, I can go into more detail on some of the stuff I've shown, and yeah, answering questions you might have. So I already have some questions, so I will just start from random, from bottom to left, and please keep sending them, and they'll pop up here on my screen. So one question I have was, now that we are a TED partner, so trusted extension developer, whether Vizlib will be made available on Qlik Cloud. So that's a good question. Qlik Cloud is the answer is there's nothing set in stone yet. We don't know. We are ready. We could deploy our stuff to Qlik Cloud, and we already had a POC where we showcased that Vizlib could work in Qlik Cloud with Qlik R&D. However, some further considerations around that, but the bottleneck is, yeah, I think it's not as easy as just importing some extensions. So that's why this is something we'll be working on. We are ready from Vizlib side, so from us, we could be on the cloud tomorrow. Yeah, we're working together with Qlik to see what else is needed and how we could potentially accommodate that. My view is Qlik Cloud needs extensions, and starting with TED extensions would be a great value add to them. So I'm pretty sure to follow up on that. There is a question around whether or not we're planning to add 100% stack chart in the bar chart. So that's already possible if you use Qlik expressions. So you just need to take your standard Qlik expression and then divide it by the total on dimension level. So you probably need to combine this with an aggr function. However, I appreciate this. It should be an easier way to achieve this. I think there is a Qlik API function that does some of that. We need to explore this, but if it makes its way, it'll also be available on the line chart now. So our goal was to make sure that we can stack first the line chart, and then we'll add this as a convenience. But just to reiterate, it's already possible. You just need to write the Qlik expressions. So I have a question around if you enable accumulate values on the measure of a line chart, it is displaying an internal engine error. Yes, this is a known issue. I think this was fixed with February or April. This was only available with certain versions of Qlik Sense. So when we initially developed the feature, that was working, but then there's a bug. I need to find out exactly on which version, but I recommend you to go to our website. We typically record these things as a known limitation, and then we highlight also which version it is affected. But yeah, it is a known issue, and it is resolved in newer versions of Qlik Sense. Right, we have a question from our friends in Israel. What about support of right to left in tables? This is a feature that is supported by the native table, where you can switch the dimensions and the measures. And because yeah, people in Israel read from right to left typically. We don't support it out of the box. Not sure we will, because I don't know how easy it is technically to do. And the concern here is about the pinning feature and the ability to reorder the columns. So that's a technical difficulty to implement in this case. Question back to you, did you try doing the right to left by rearranging column order and potentially putting the dimensions to the right and the measures to the left? Would like to hear what struggles or where eventually you hit a brick wall where you can get in further, and potentially we can look at it again. So one question we have, which is, can we do something like a target of 500? And if a measure of a metric exceeds your target, it will show a red color. with some text, target 500, so users know exactly what the target is. You could, right? So in the Vizlib table, for example, and I think the pivot table as well, you can use conditional expressions to highlight certain cells depending on a measure value, right? So you can highlight them in red if they exceed 500, and the text itself, you know, normally it's a number, but you can also put in an expression. If it exceeds 500, then put in a text string with the expression result, else just the number result. So that should be possible. I'd encourage you to have a go with this using if expressions, and if you cannot continue or you struggle, then send us an email to support@vizlib.com and we'll be happy to look at it. So we have a question. So we're trying to work through a lot of questions here. So I'm trying to select points on the line chart, but it's not enabled. How to activate this? So at the moment, you cannot on the line chart select specific data points, I think. If I quickly open the example that I've just built, perhaps I will show you how to potentially work around it. So I think the question was, if I look at the time chart, you can not make selections here on the data point, or actually you can. So, all right, I'll correct myself. If you select the line here, you do not select the data point, but you select the region. If you want to select the data point, you will need to go here. And in this case, you would need to make a date range select. So you scroll through the x-axis and then you can select the particular month. So this is how it would work. If you have any more questions, or if this is not your use case, please send us an email describing, and then we'll look into this. So, so the question is, when will saving formatting will be available on the pivot table chart? That is already released. Make sure you are using the latest table. If you're a customer and you're using on-premise, which I think you are in this case, you need to manually update Vizlib pivot table, and then it should be able to export. So you'll see that setting there. Right, and there's another question around whether or not the Vizlib table, which is brilliant, but I think there is a very compelling use case on the table, which we've had a couple of times, which is to be able to organize the headers into so-called subcategories. So let's say country, actual versus target, and year to date get like one header, and then year on year and year to date daily trend get a second header. We're looking at this. It is not yet prioritized, but it's already recorded with us. I definitely see the necessity of this feature. Question is, could you achieve it with the pivot table? Perhaps not, or perhaps not as conveniently, because I agree, it's not necessarily a dimension value. We will look at this. So there have been some requirements around that, and I definitely see the value on this, Michael. Thank you for the question and bringing it up again. So we have, right, there's a question around using the background color in a measure for a pivot table, and color mix 2 isn't working. I will need to test that and check with the team, but my assumption is that we need hex color codes in order to be able to correctly highlight or color code the pivot table cell, and I don't think the color mix function is returning that. So I'm not sure that function is appropriate for this use case. We'll need to look what other alternatives would help, because I appreciate what you're trying to do is you're trying to color a column, a cell, and make it look a little bit like a heat map, I think. Let me take this offline and we'll come back to you. I think we also have a call organized either later this week or early next week, Jonathan. So we'll look at it as well and come back to you. So there's a question whether the KPI will be included as part of the release for July and further enhanced so users can try it out. So the KPI object is not yet available. It is not released. It will officially be released as part of the Vizlib August release. However, again, just to come back to you regarding our release cycles, this is just a formality, I would say. Whenever we release updates, they're always available to you right away when they're available. So the KPI object, once it's released next week, you'll be able to download it next week. So with your release cycles, you have two ways. You can download the extensions as and when they are available. You can see now my download portal with the different versions. Or if you prefer a slower release cycle, you can prefer to download once a month, the July, June, and May. You have the option, it's the same thing. So if you go in July, you'll download certain versions of the individual extensions, or you can decide to download extensions individually. The reason why we have that monthly release cycle is to give you a little bit of a more organized overview and more transparency of what has changed to the last month. And an email will be sent out. So if you signed up with us, you'll be made aware when the KPI object is available. And typically, as with all our extensions, we release a version 1 relatively quickly and then ultimately enhance it over time. So we don't wait until it's perfect. We make sure that you can start playing around it, get some feedback, and then ultimately work on that. There's a question on the line chart. Can individual lines be segmented if you have more than one line? Yes, but those lines need to be defined as individual expressions. So if you have two different measures on the line chart, then you can segment them separately, but you cannot segment different lines of dimension split. So if you use 2 dimensions, one measure, this will not work. But if you use multiple measures, it should work. So there's a question around, which is actually quite interesting, whether we have future plans to create extensions to enhance the QMC management. And not officially, but we had some brainstorm internally of how we could make the extension management as a starting point a little bit more friendlier. And so the problem right now, or challenge, I would say, is that people, if you want to download our extensions or Vizlib, you need to go to our website, you need to download it, and then you install it manually, and so on and so on. And if you have a team of 10 developers, you need to share your account, and so on and so on. So what we kind of want to envision to do is to give you a tiny mashup that you will install on your Qlik Sense environment. And using that mashup, you can manage your Qlik Sense extensions and extensions from the data viz market much more user-friendly way. So we are talking about auto-updating to detect which versions you have and also immediately showcase which extensions have been updated whenever they have been new releases. And this will work hand in hand with the Qlik security rules, where you'll only be able to see that page if you have permission to manage extensions. So this is something that we're looking on to take on probably in November time. So we're first going to release the combo chart, the waterfall chart, the sheet menu, but it's definitely our roadmap. We want to improve that. And before I go into more questions, I want to use one feature here of which is, obviously I've showcased just now the roadmap that we have on our Q&A. So coming here. So naturally we aim to have a sheet menu as the next extension, but bringing this back to you guys, I'm going to launch now a poll asking you, after a Vizlib KPI object, which one would you guys like to see as the next one? So your screen should now have a quick poll, and you'll be able to select one of the bullet charts as well. I'm going to let this run. Responses are collected. Great. We already have half of attendees voted. This is very exciting. There's actually a quick battle between 2 extensions. So we're still collecting responses, and Okay, all right, I'll now close the poll. And I will share the results, which is right. I think there's a close tight battle between the sheet menu and the combo chart. Interesting, because perhaps even the combo chart wouldn't be too hard for us to develop. So no, thank you very much for that feedback. That's actually very valuable. We'll look at it and perhaps we can see if we can potentially even push the two of them together. But I think the combo chart is nearly a bar chart that we already have, however, with the supplemented line chart. Cool. Continuing now, there's some more question. How can we share ideas? So at the moment, this can be done by sending us an email at support@vizlib.com. We are tagging this as a feature request, and then ultimately it goes into our project management tool, and when it gets out, you'll get informed. We are looking to improve this in the next coming month by opening up a Vizlib community where you can openly post ideas and suggestions in a forum, and where people can upvote it and downvote, and then ultimately have a little bit more public discussions of what are interesting. There's a question around chatbots. Whether or not we're planning to do chatbots. Not at this stage. I'm not going to say no. It's not necessarily our expertise, but we have been having some ideas around collaboration, communication, and sharing. And we have a benefit ultimately to release a feature on all our extensions. So our Vizlib library upgrade. So that ultimately means a lot of power and also value add to the whole extension stack. Officially no, but I am also not saying no, if that answers your question. So there's a question whether there's going to be an update on the timeline extension sometime in the near future. I'll admit it has been lagging a little bit. There are some feature requests and also a few bug reports on this, but I think we have now collected a few of those feature requests to say, okay, it'll be worth to have it another go. So we have a couple of open tickets regarding this. So I think now with the KPI object, once that's out of the door, we'll look at that one as well. So because I agree, it's been some time around this. And there is a question around, so your client has Qlik View licenses. So the question is if you can use Vizlib extensions for free. Vizlib is free to use for up to 5 users. So you can evaluate it, you can play around with it, you can test all unrestricted functionality. However, if you're planning to use this for production purposes, or if you heavily rely on Vizlib objects so they become part of your strategic dashboard, I highly recommend you to subscribe to Vizlib Professional. Could be 10 users in this case, to make sure that you'll be eligible for support. So if you have any questions around that, they'll be able to answer you. Obviously, we'll do our best and answer any support queries that come our way. However, please understand, subscribed customers have priority, so they'll be answered first, and then wherever we have capacity, we'll make sure to help everybody else as well. So there's one question around whether it's possible to add different color to column headers on the pivot table, and it seems to accept only one color for the whole header. That is possible, actually. I will just very briefly show you where. So obviously, we don't have the concept of column headers anymore. So here you have 2 ways to change the headers. Obviously, you can apply a global setting. So you can go into the appearance tab. Sorry, here we are. And you can apply one color here, which applies to all of them. Or you can go to the individual dimensions. So let's say month here, for example, and you can add dynamic styling. So if I, for example, add here dynamic styling, let's say January, this is now white, and you can now control January individually. So this is how you could manage that. So we have generally 2 kind of settings, one which is global, applies to the whole header, and then obviously on the individual dimension value. Some people are already jumping offline. Yes, to Jonathan, I think we'll take this offline because we need to look as well why that's happening in your case. I've pinged you an email this morning. If you can come back with some dates, we're more than happy to. Yeah, we'll jump on the WebEx and also look at the other question around. I don't remember. I think I wrote it down. So right, we still have some questions, but we have exceeded the time. I would suggest if your question is unanswered, please send us an email to support@vizlib.com. What I would like to do is before we close, I would like to send another poll to the user audience, which is obviously we're doing as we can to improve our support, to improve our communication with you guys. But obviously we have some more ideas and we kind of want to see what you would think would be more valuable. So we would like to get your opinion of what you would think would improve our Vizlib support mode. So I already highlighted we have the idea of the Vizlib community. We also have been speaking internally of having dedicated Vizlib Slack channels for customers and users. Perhaps chat support. Sorry, it was supposed to be chat, not chart. Perhaps that speeds things up. Not everybody likes sending emails. People like being able to jump on the website and quickly chat with somebody. Do you like the webinar? Shall we do more of those? Perhaps more specific on individual extensions to showcase you how to do some P&L reports with the pivot table and from ground up and building them up. And last item is the videos on YouTube. So that's typically a very nice way for you guys to learn and find out more about Vizlib without us having to be present. But I would kind of get your view what you would think would be more valuable. It's great. We have 70% of the people voted. I'm still gonna wait one more minute. That is actually very, very useful to us. So thank you very much for taking the time. And 5 more seconds. Brilliant. So I'm going to share the votes with you. Thank you very much for that. So a lot of you would see the value in Vizlib community with forums and more webinars, tutorials. I agree. It's a good point. There's so much functionality, so many features that we have in Vizlib, and I appreciate you're not all aware of them and you don't have the time to explore them all yourselves. So I think some of those would be highly appreciated. So no, thank you very much for that feedback. With that poll, I'm going to conclude it. I will officially end the webinar. So thank you very much for attending again. If you are in New York again next week, let us know. I'm more than happy to meet with you, be it for a drink or meet you on site, or we can organize a demo. Aside from that, thank you very much for attending. We will do these things obviously now regular on a monthly basis. Sorry. Here's the thing. So we do these things regular on a monthly basis, and following up on the vote just now, I think we'll spend more time on YouTube and building that community. By the way, this is already in works, so I'm very glad the feedback on this was very positive. So there's still some questions outstanding. If you can, please copy paste them, send them to us via an email, and we'll look at them in more detail. Aside from that, thank you very much. For those of you who jumped in late or you want to share this webinar, this has been recorded. So I'll upload it later today onto YouTube, and you'll be able to look at it at your own convenience or share it with colleagues. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for following Vizlib, for your support. We feel it. We're very, very glad. And as always, we work very hard and we strive to add more functionality, more features to Qlik Sense, which hopefully will drive your business adoption and help you build some really cool dashboards and make the most of the data within your organization. Thank you very much, and we shall see you next month. Bye-bye.